Hello my friends, HM here. I make videos about topics that are important for whether the future will be better or worse. Since 2020, Elon Musk has repeatedly urged miners to mine more nickel to help the auto industry make more battery electric vehicles. In today's video, I investigate the reasons why Elon Musk worries more about nickel supply rather than other raw materials for battery electric vehicles such as lithium, cobalt or rare earth. Before we begin, you should know that HM Experience aspire to be as true as possible. For that reason, all claims made are documented by clickable links to other internet resources. This documentation can be downloaded by following the link below this video to my vlog at hmexperience.dk. Okay, so let's start this presentation here. So the first reason I'd like to mention why Elon Musk worries about nickel in battery electric vehicles is that nickel is a very expensive raw material. In fact, it's the most expensive raw material. And we can see that in this table here that I have gathered with a lot of information about what kind of raw materials is a battery electric car made up of. It uses graphite in the battery, it uses nickel also in the battery. It uses lithium, it uses copper, manganese, magnesium, zinc, cobalt, rare earth, aluminium, crude steel, and then some plastic and textiles and other materials. And it all sums up to 1,630 kilo. And I have found out how many kilo each of these materials go into a typical battery electric car. And then I've gone to the commodity markets and found the price for that raw material. And they're not traded in kilo, but I converted it all into kilo. I also converted it into US dollar. Many of these raw materials are traded not in US dollar but in Chinese yuan, and then I multiplied these 2 kilo times price in order to get the total US dollar amount that goes into making a battery electric vehicle. And as you can see, there's 62 kilo of nickel in a battery electric vehicle. It costs 25 US dollar per kilo, so it's 1,600 US dollars almost, and that's the highest amount of raw material. It's more than a quarter of the total raw material cost in a battery electric vehicle. The only one that can almost match it is lithium carbonate. That's $1,200. Here I should mention, if you are one of my followers and you have seen the previous video I made about lithium raw materials, similar video as this one, you'd probably wonder why nickel was 1,000 US dollar and lithium was actually $2,000 in that video. That's true, but meanwhile I found better sources for my data here, and also the prices has changed. Lithium price has been falling quite a lot. Lithium is now $1,200, and also I use less lithium from this source. The new source I found that is better, and then of course I will change it and use that going forward. It's coming from Tesla itself. So the amount of graphite, nickel, lithium, cobalt that goes into a battery is now coming from Tesla itself, and specifically for their Model Y long range with an 83 kilowatt hour battery. That's kind of the standard vehicle I've attempted to match here in my raw material accumulation. So why else is Musk worried about nickel price? Well, because nickel price is quite volatile. Sometimes it's twice as expensive as this one. So 25 US dollar per kilo sometimes become 50 US dollar per kilo. And then we have 3,000 US dollar in raw material cost just for nickel. And we can see it down here in this price graph that I gathered from a really good website, Trading Economics. It's called, has free data for a lot of economic variables and a lot of commodity prices and other prices. Highly recommend using it if you're interested in economic stuff. Okay, anyway, it spiked here back in 2007, I think it is, to 50,000 US dollar per ton. And there's also another spike in 2022, also to 50,000 US dollars. We cannot see it in this graph because it was very temporary, and this graph is taking over 25 years. So it only has monthly averages, and that average simply drowned in the few days where the nickel price spiked to 50,000 for that period. Okay, but where else are we using nickel in a car? I looked that up to be sure that it was not just in the battery that there was nickel, but it could be other places. And there are one other place where we use nickel. That's for making stainless steel. On average, about 3.8% of stainless steel is pure nickel. Stainless steel is an alloy. Mostly it's iron that is in it, but it also contains nickel. So, and where do we use stainless steel in a car? It turned out it's actually only cars with combustion engines that use a lot of stainless steel because they need it for their exhaust system. The exhaust system is a corrosive environment and they need stainless steel for this system to last. But battery electric vehicles don't have that. So really in a battery electric vehicle, nickel can pretty much exclusively be found in the battery if that car is using a battery chemistry that uses nickel, because there are battery chemistries that do not use nickel. But these other battery chemistries, that's mainly lithium iron phosphate batteries. They don't use nickel, nor do they use cobalt, but they have one disadvantage, that is they don't have as much energy density as the nickel-rich batteries, and that's why we would like to mine more nickel so we can make batteries with higher energy density. But I'll come back to that about battery chemistries in a later slide. But otherwise, yeah, okay, on this slide here, just to finish it off, consumption of nickel globally, where do we use nickel? Well, actually, stainless steel production. We produce a lot of stainless steel in this world, and it consumes 69% of all the nickel that are produced. That is going into making stainless steel. And then batteries is 11%. And then there are some other alloys that are consuming pretty much the rest. And that's how nickel are consumed. But going forward, you can rest assured that the consumption of nickel for batteries will go up. It will be much more than 11%, but stainless steel is also increasing, but I'll come back to that. Okay, I think that's enough for this slide. Okay, so let's look at the second reason that Elon Musk worries about nickel and production of nickel. Supply chain issues are certain to arise in a world where we want to make 100 million battery electric vehicles per year by 2032. That's the most ambitious, you could say, of all the targets, and it's a lot more ambitious than the auto industry and also many governments think. But I made a video about it, that the world is actually transitioning quite fast to battery electric vehicles, and I think it's more likely it will be all done and over with by 2032. In some countries it will even happen faster. That'll be China. And I think I'll make an upcoming video about that very soon, because new data suggests that in just 5 years, China will be all battery electric vehicles or hybrid plug-in vehicles. Anyway, that's a little sidestep here. It will go very fast, a lot faster than people think, and we will need more nickel for that. How much nickel? Well, if all of these battery electric vehicles are using nickel-rich batteries, they won't. But let's assume, for the sake of the argument, that they all use nickel-rich batteries. Then we need to mine 6.2 million tons of nickel per year just to make 100 million such battery electric vehicles. And I have done the calculation in this table that I've shown over here, where we have, again, it's the same raw materials that goes into this table as the previous table we just considered. But here I have simply multiplied with 100 million to get the amount of material we need for making 100 million vehicles. And then I have found the global production in tons currently of all this material. For instance, nickel has currently a global production of 3.3 million tons of nickel here in 2022. We can also see the graph here for global nickel production down here. It has actually doubled from 2010. It was 1.5 million tons, and now today it's 3.3 million tons. So the requirement of 6.2 million tons for battery electric vehicles is actually 187% of total current production. So obviously we need to grow production of nickel to meet demand for electric vehicles. That is certain to grow very fast. And what makes this situation a little more peculiar for nickel in particular is that we actually also need to use a lot more nickel going forward for making stainless steel. And we can see this from this graph down here, where we saw that from 2009 the production of stainless steel also doubled from 25 million tons of stainless steel to 60 million tons. And because we have the global nickel production of 3.3 million tons, and we know that 69% of it goes into making stainless steel, we can simply take that nickel production, multiply it with the percentage used for steel production, and then divide by 60 million tons of stainless steel we produce. And then we know, okay, 3.8% of stainless steel is made up of nickel. When we have that percentage, we can make a good estimate of how much more nickel do we need for another doubling of stainless steel production that could happen before 2032. So in 2032 we might produce 120 million tons of stainless steel, and that will actually require 4.6 million tons of nickel. So the total demand, very optimistically, could go up to nearly 11.2 million tons for nickel. That would be 4.6 million tons for stainless steel production, 6.2 million tons for battery electric vehicles, and then 0.4 million tons for other stuff. But that's not gonna happen, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that now. So let's go for the next slide. So why is 11.2 million tons not gonna happen by 2032? Well, it's mostly because we have alternatives to nickel for making battery electric vehicles. But let's first start by making an estimate of what might be likely needed for nickel production by 2032. One estimate would be that it will double from current production of 3.3 million to 6.6 million tons without much change in the nickel price required. So it will stay around $25 per kilo. And one reason for justifying this estimate that it will double is that we have seen a doubling since 2010. It went from 1.5 million tons of nickel to 3.3 million tons of nickel. So that's a doubling, or more than a doubling, and wouldn't be unreasonable to expect it could do the same once more. If we do have that doubling, so let's say we produce 6.6 million ton in 2032, how much nickel would we use for steel? Well, in the previous slide we saw in order to double stainless steel production, we would need 4.6 million tons of nickel for that. And then others would probably be the same at 0.4 million tons. So that's around 5 million tons of nickel that's used for stainless steel and other stuff. And that leaves 1.6 million tons of nickel for battery production. And that would be enough to make 26 million nickel-rich battery electric vehicles in 2032. That's of course not 100 million battery electric vehicles, but it doesn't need to be that, because just take Tesla as an example. At Tesla's Battery Day, they presented a lot of things, but they had this slide that their strategy was to have a diversified cathode approach where they use lithium iron phosphate batteries. They're using that for storage and for small cars and mid-range cars. And then the very long-range cars, well, they'll be using nickel. And also they have a heavy car that would be the Cybertruck. They plan to use high nickel for that. And also for the Semi, that presentation was 3 years ago. And now I know that the Semi come in a long-range version that uses high nickel battery, and the shorter range version that has 300 miles range will basically uses iron phosphate battery that has an energy density of 160 to 200 watt hours per kilo. This is quite high, especially the 200 watt hours. That would be the newest available chemistries for this category of batteries that uses lithium iron phosphate cathodes. But let's compare that to these high nickel batteries that Tesla are also making. Tesla is making two cells currently, one cell called 2170, and that's a measure of how big that cell is. And that one has an energy density of 269 watt hours per kilo. Then they also manufacture a brand new cell with a lot of new technologies in it, the 4680 cell, and it's supposed to eventually get higher energy density than this 2170. But they had to make some compromises in order to make the cell. They use a new process for making these battery cells that's called dry electrode process, and they have had trouble making that work. They have poor yields, so they have to throw out a lot of the cells they are manufacturing because they're not manufactured to the standard they wanted to be. And so they had to make some changes to the chemistry of that battery so they can get the yield up of their production for this new battery. And that's why it's still at a low 244 watt hours per kilo, which is low for a battery cell that has high nickel content in it. But I think over time they'll fix it and it'll get up. But anyway, the point is there are alternatives to high nickel battery cells, and they will be made available. There's also a more speculative alternative that's called natrium ion or sodium ion batteries. A lot of YouTubers talk about it and say it's a done deal, but it's not. It has been researched for many years in the labs, but nobody have mass produced it yet because it has fairly low energy density and as long as nobody have mass produced it, we don't know if it can be mass produced at low cost. Because one thing is to do something in the lab, and it's completely different to do it in mass scale. That's 100 times more difficult in terms of the engineering hours required to make it happen in mass scale production. I think it will happen, this sodium-ion battery. It will be made in mass production, but it will take longer than everybody thinks at YouTube and also popular press. It will take a couple of years to get it into large-scale production, because that's just how these things happen. So I think that's what I wanted to say about that slide here. So let's look a little closer at the supply chain risk here. I'll say that the supply chain risk is low for nickel production and also for nickel reserves, because it's friendly countries like Australia, Indonesia and Brazil. They control 55% of known nickel reserves here in the world, and we can see that in this table over here. Australia, Indonesia and Brazil, they have 20, 20 and 15% respectively of the total reserves that we have here. And then we can also see that production is concentrated with almost half of all the world's nickel production in Indonesia. But Indonesia is a friendly country, so I don't consider it to be a particular risk. What are risky, we know that because of aggressive behavior from China and Russia, the only two risky countries, and I've highlighted them here with yellow. But both in terms of production, Russia and China control 10% of the global production and also only control about 10% combined of total reserves. So that's not very much, and that's the only two countries that everybody are worried about being supplied by. Then I made a little calculation here. What if we took the current global reserves of 102 million tons of nickel and we used all of that nickel to make battery electric vehicles with nickel-rich batteries? How many battery electric vehicles could we make if we did that? And we can make 1.65 billion of these vehicles simply by taking this 102 and divide it by 62 kilo, and then we get it. And I don't think that's a lot. It might sound like a lot, but it's not a lot, because we just saw that 3/4 of the nickel reserves are likely to be used for other things than making batteries. And then you can divide this number here with 4, and then you get about 400 million battery electric vehicles with high nickel batteries. If we used all of today's reserves on that, that's not a lot. In this world, we need at least 2 billion vehicles. So we definitely should mine more nickel, and we should also look for more reserves so we can expand the reserves. But we can also see here we have a graph of the reserves of nickel worldwide from year 2000 to 2022, and we can see these reserves over those 22 years, they doubled from 50 million ton to 102 million ton. So continued growth is definitely looks likely. And what will cause nickel reserves to grow? Well, it's new discoveries, of course, but it's also if we invent new extraction technologies, so ores that were previously not economic to extract nickel from, well, they become economic to extract nickel from because of new extraction technology. And also increased price for nickel. That's what we don't hope, that it's just increasing prices that should increase the reserves and also production, because that will make electric vehicles more expensive. And what will cause nickel reserves to fall? Well, lower nickel prices will definitely cause nickel reserves to fall, because reserves are estimated as what is currently economic to extract at the given prices. And then, of course, extraction of nickel causes nickel reserves to fall, because more ore is taken away from these reserves, and that means the reserves are falling. And then, of course, lower nickel ore quality. As you mine more nickel ore, the quality usually drops. It has happened a lot for copper. With copper, we used to have ore with 6% copper in it. Now you can't find that. It's below 0.6% copper. I just know that from my head. But I think a similar thing has happened with nickel ore. It continues to drop because we mine the easiest, the lowest hanging fruit first. But I think that's enough for this slide here. Okay, so how hard is it to scale nickel production? The question will be, how hard is it to double nickel production from its current 3.3 million tons to 6.6 million tons annually by 2032? And here we should recall that these 6.6 million tons would be what we would expect the demand would be from stainless steel and also batteries for battery electric vehicles in 2032. I think it's very doable, because we'll need to mine mined the equivalent of 550 million tons of nickel ore at 1.2% nickel content, which is typical for nickel ore today. That might sound like a lot, but 550 million tons of ore is actually only 14% of the iron ore that we mine today. And we can see that in this table over here that shows the scale of the global raw materials industries by size in tons and also US dollar sales. And we have the material types down here. And here we have nickel. Production of nickel is 3.3 million ton in 2022. Nickel ore production at 1.2% nickel in the ore is 275. And if we double that, that would be 550 million tons. And we can see down here that here we have iron ore needed. That's at 50% iron. Iron ore is actually rust, and it can be found many places on Earth. But we need to mine nearly 4 billion tons of that every year, and that will produce 2 billion tons of crude steel. So the amounts that we are mining currently for iron will dwarf what's needed to mine for nickel, and that's why it should be possible to mine more nickel. The problem with nickel is really that the reserves of nickel is quite low, as we just saw it in the previous slide. And also the problem is that the price of nickel is quite high, so it affects the price of battery electric vehicles, especially if it goes further up. But one thing we should note here is that all the materials we need here for battery electric vehicles, they can be recycled, and also this stainless steel can be recycled, so we will not need to mine as much as we have shown here, because it will be recycled. And why will it be recycled? Because it's very economic to recycle nickel from used up batteries from electric vehicles. And we can see that from a slide here that Tesla presented 3 years ago, held a battery day where they told all about their strategy for making more battery cells. And they had this slide here that shows that 20% of the weight of a battery is pure nickel, and nickel ore is 1.2%. The best ore you can imagine is to mine nickel from used up batteries. That's far more profitable than mining it from ore. The same goes for lithium here. In a battery there's 2.7% lithium, but in a typical lithium ore it's only 0.7% lithium. Cobalt is 2% cobalt in a used lithium battery, and cobalt ore is only 0.2% cobalt. So used batteries will be a gold mine for miners to extract metals from. And also copper. I added copper myself to this slide here. There are 8% copper in a used lithium-ion battery, and the ore for copper is only 0.6% today. It used to be much higher, but because of a lot of mining, it has dropped, as I gave you an example of previously. But okay, before we leave this slide here, I would say that I have also included coal here, and oil and gas, and I have calculated how many tons of coal and oil and gas do we actually extract or mine. We mine 8 billion tons of coal every year. We extract 4.2 billion tons of oil, and we extract 3.9 billion tons of natural gas. If we sum these fossil fuels up, it's 16 billion tons, and that completely dwarfs 550 million tons we need of nickel ore to get 6.6 million tons of pure nickel metal out of it. So really, in a future that's based on renewable energy from wind and solar, and where we use battery electric vehicles to go around and basically have dropped using fossil fuels, well, we'll have much less mining industry would be needed for that, because we don't need that fossil fuel, and that's the bulk of what we mine and extract today. Okay, but I think I'm done with this table. And here in this slide here, I have sources and attribution for all the previous slide. All the things I've said, I have clickable sources to that. And also there's an Excel spreadsheet where I have all the tables I have used in this presentation, and where there's also clickable links inside these tables, so you can confirm whatever I've said here, that it's true. If you found this video interesting, consider giving it a thumbs up, and also subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching my video. I wish you a healthy and fulfilling life in freedom and democracy.